The wind shrieked through the canyon like a widow wailing at a grave, carrying with it the sting of ice and the weight of loneliness. Snow thickened the air until even the pines bent low under its burden. Against the jagged rock face, a dark mouth yawned open, a cave, shallow but sheltering, where a small fire had sputtered into smoke and died. Inside, Eliza Mayfield pressed herself against the cold stone, her breath shallow, her dress torn where claws had raked her side. Blood, bright as berries against the pale snow, stained her bodice. She had stumbled into the cave half delirious, clutching her shawl though it was little more than rags. Her lips whispered prayers that broke apart in the frozen air, prayers she did not believe would reach heaven. She had been abandoned, left behind by the wagon train when her scream brought the bear from the brush. Her body trembled as though the ground itself had risen against her. The growl of the beast still echoed in her skull, though it lay now on the cave floor, its breath rattling faint, one eye clouded with death. It had retreated after mauling her, strength spent, leaving her to either freeze or bleed. She had pressed snow to the wound until her fingers went numb. She did not know how long she had lain there, only that the storm had swallowed all sound but her heart. That was when he appeared. A figure filled the cave's mouth, so broad he seemed carved from the very mountain. Snow clung to his hair, black as ravens, and down the ridges of his bare chest, where scars glimmered pale in the dim light. In his hand he dragged the bear's body, its throat opened by a blade, blood steaming on the snow. He cast it aside with a grunt, the sound reverberating like thunder within stone walls. Eliza gasped, scrambling back, pain flaring through her ribs. "Please don't," she stammered, voice cracked and small. Fear widened her eyes as she pressed against the wall, every breath a plea. She had heard the whispers in town. Apache warriors, ruthless and wild, raiders of settlements. Now one stood before her, silent as a shadow. The man did not move closer. His dark eyes studied her, not with the hunger of a predator, but with something harder to name, like the mountain watching a storm. He knelt, scooping snow, pressing it against his blade to clean the blood. The sound of steel against ice filled the silence, sharper than any word. She drew her torn shawl tighter, though it did nothing against the cold or his gaze. Her shame pricked sharper than her wound, that he, a stranger, should see her so helpless, broken like a bird with one wing crushed. "Why are you here?" she whispered, as if words could drive him away. Still he did not speak. He reached instead to his belt, drawing out a folded piece of buffalo hide, thick and worn. With careful slowness, he laid it across her lap. She flinched, but he did not force it on her. The weight of it, heavy with the smell of smoke and earth, brought sudden warmth. Her eyes burned with tears she would not let fall. "I don't understand." At last his voice came, deep and steady, carrying the cadence of rivers over stone. "Don't be afraid. You are safe with me." The words struck her chest harder than the bear's claws had. No one had ever spoken them to her, not her father, who left when she was a child, not the men of the wagon train who had run when the beast lunged. The sound of it felt impossible, and yet here in the frozen dark, she wanted to believe. He crouched near the fire pit, striking flint with practiced hands. Sparks leapt, glow catching in his eyes until they gleamed amber. Soon smoke curled upward, then flame licked the kindling, spreading orange across the stone. Heat unfurled like a blessing, filling the cave with light enough to see her wound. He glanced at it, then tore a strip of hide from his leggings and held it out. She shook her head. I can manage." But her fingers would not obey, trembling too violently. Wordless, he moved closer. The air between them seemed to quiver, filled with her racing heartbeat. He pressed the cloth against her side, firm yet gentle. She gasped, not only from pain but from the strangeness of being tended by hands so large, so scarred, yet so careful. He tied the makeshift bandage without a word, his fingers precise. The fire crackled. Snow hissed as it melted at the cave's lip. Outside, the storm screamed, but inside only the quiet work of survival remained. She dared to study him as he leaned back, his chest rising slow, breath even, as though the cold did not touch him. Scars mapped his body like stories no one had told her. "You'll leave me," she whispered suddenly, bitterness thickening her voice. like the others. His gaze lifted, steady, unreadable. Then he shook his head once, the motion solemn. Tears blurred her sight. She turned toward the fire, ashamed of her weakness, ashamed too of how desperately she wanted to believe him. The heat wrapped her in a fragile cocoon, her body loosening though her mind still spun with fear. Exhaustion tugged her down, deeper than she could resist. Her eyes fluttered shut. Just before darkness claimed her, she felt a touch, light as a whisper, brushing the hair from her face. Not command, not possession, but a gesture of strange reverence. And with that, the storm outside wailed on, and she surrendered to sleep, the image of his scarred hand the last thing she carried into the dark. The fire held through the night, its glow trembling along the cave walls, casting the man and woman into fragile silhouettes. Eliza woke to its warmth, the memory of pain in her side pulling her back from dreams. Her hand pressed against the rough hide bound to her ribs, and she winced. For a moment she forgot where she was, until the shape across the fire stirred, and fear returned to her chest like a knife pulled fresh from the sheath. He sat with his back to the wall, knees bent, head lowered as if he had been listening to the fire breathe. His skin gleamed bronze in the flicker, his scars deepening into shadow. She noticed the frost melting from his dark hair, dripping onto the cave floor. He had kept watch while she slept. Her throat felt dry as ash. "You stayed." His eyes lifted to hers. The firelight caught the dark irises, giving them a reddish glint. He did not speak immediately, and the silence between them pressed down heavier than stone. At last, he gave a single nod, as though words were too weak to bind such truth. Her lips trembled. "Why?" The question held more than she intended. It was the question of her life, the hollow echo of abandonment, of being left in the snow like a stray. The man shifted, his massive shoulders rising and falling. Then he spoke, slow, deliberate, as if measuring each syllable. "Because you were alone." The words landed within her like hot coals pressed to frozen flesh. She blinked hard, trying to hide the way her eyes shimmered. She hated herself for the tears, hated being seen so stripped, but the gentleness in his voice seemed to burn away her defenses. He rose to his feet, towering so that his head brushed the stone above. She flinched back, but he only crouched near the bare carcass, slicing strips of meat with a knife honed by use. The scent of blood mixed with smoke, earthy and raw. He skewered the flesh, laying it carefully across the flames until it hissed and sputtered. Her stomach betrayed her with a low growl. Heat flooded her face, shame washing over her as though hunger itself were weakness. He glanced up, saw her hand clutch her belly as though to silence it, and turned the meat toward her without a word. She hesitated. Every teaching of her upbringing screamed caution. He was Apache, feared, condemned by preachers and neighbors alike. Yet the smoke rose rich and bitter, her body aching for nourishment. Slowly she reached out, her fingers brushing his as she took the stick. His hand lingered, warm and calloused, before retreating. The first bite seared her tongue, yet she could not stop herself. Tears slipped down her cheeks, not only from hunger but from the unbearable kindness of it, being fed when she had been left to die. She turned her face away, hiding her tears in the dark. "Thank you," she whispered, the words small as a child's confession. His gaze rested on her, steady, unreadable, as though weighing whether her gratitude carried truth. At last, he gave a short bow of his head. "Eat. You need strength." The silence that followed was no longer empty. It was weighted with something tentative, like the first fragile ice across a pond. She stole glances at him, at the breadth of his chest, the way his breath misted in the cold, the steadiness of his posture. Not a single twitch of menace lived in him. He sat with the calmness of an oak, as if storms might batter him, yet never break his roots. When she had eaten her fill, he reached for his satchel, pulling a small bundle wrapped in hide. He opened it to reveal herbs and dried roots, crushed into powder. Mixing them with snowmelt in a small tin, he made a bitter-smelling poultice. She stiffened as he moved toward her again. "I can do it," she said quickly, though her hands trembled too much to lift the cloth at her ribs. He waited, patient as stone, until her resistance fell away. With careful hands he untied the bandage he had given her, and pressed the paste against the wound. Pain shot through her and she gasped, her body jerking. Instinctively, she grabbed his wrist. For a heartbeat they froze, her small hand clutching his scarred forearm, his eyes locked to hers. The world narrowed to that point of contact, to the thunder of her heart and the stillness of his. She wanted to pull away, but her fingers refused, clinging as though he were the only anchor in the storm. His voice broke the silence, quiet, grave. "I will not hurt you." Her grip loosened, shame flushing her cheeks, but she nodded. His touch was steady, finishing the work with precision. When he bound her side again, she noticed the way his fingers shook slightly. Not from cold, but from restraint. He was careful, as if she were something fragile that might break beneath too much strength. When he finished, he pulled back, but not before placing the buffalo hide once more across her shoulders. She clutched it close, feeling its weight, its warmth, the echo of his silent promise. The firelight deepened, shadows stretching across the walls. Outside, the storm's howl softened to a low moan, as if even the wind had grown weary. The cave felt less like a tomb, and more like a shelter carved by unseen hands. Eliza's eyes lowered, her voice unsteady. "Back there, when I thought I'd die. I prayed someone would find me. I never thought it would be you." Something flickered across his face. Pain, memory, she could not tell. He looked away into the fire, as though her words pressed against a wound he kept hidden. "What is your name?" she asked softly, the question trembling out before she could catch it. He paused, then spoke as though from a far distance. "Chenoa." She whispered it, testing its shape, letting it linger on her tongue. It carried the taste of rivers and stone, something older than she could fathom. For the first time since the bear's claws tore her world apart, her lips curved into the faintest shadow of a smile. Chenoa glanced at her, his brow furrowed, as though the sight unsettled him more than her blood or her tears had. He rose again, his height blotting out the fire's glow, and walked to the mouth of the cave. Snow drifted in faint veils beyond him, stars glimmering cold above the storm's retreat. Eliza clutched the hide around her and stared at his back, struck by the sudden terror that he might step out and vanish into the wilderness, leaving her as the others had. The ache of that thought rose sharp in her chest. "Will you leave me?" she asked, her voice almost breaking. The silence stretched. He turned his head slightly, the fire outlining the scars across his cheek. His answer came low, steady, unshaken. "No." The word filled the cave like a vow. And yet, as the wind carried faint echoes from the valley below, the distant sound of bells, perhaps voices, Eliza felt a shiver of unease, as though the world beyond the fire was already stirring against them. The snow softened into a weary drizzle by the time they reached the valley. Smoke rose thin from the chimneys of the settlement, curling into the pale sky like prayers trying to escape heaven. Eliza leaned heavily against Chenoa's arm as they walked the final stretch. Her steps faltered often, but he steadied her without words, as though the rhythm of his breath might guide her through the pain. She had imagined homecoming would feel like salvation, but as the wooden shapes of houses emerged, a different weight settled on her chest. The streets, half buried in snow, seemed too still, the curtains in the windows drawn back just enough to let eyes follow their slow approach. The air changed, not softer for the presence of people, but sharper, edged with suspicion. A door creaked open. A woman with a shawl around her shoulders froze at the sight of them, and then turned away quickly, calling into her house. Another man leaned against a post, his mouth curling in disdain. Whispers traveled faster than footsteps. Before long, faces gathered at corners, watching. Eliza's throat tightened. She could feel their gaze not only on her but on the figure beside her, this giant bare-armed Apache with scars carved deep across his chest. Her shame burned hotter than her wound. She pulled the buffalo hide tighter around herself, not to shield from the cold, but from the eyes that judged. The church bell tolled. From its door came Reverend Silas Boone, tall, lean, his beard peppered with gray. He raised a hand, but not in welcome. "Eliza Mayfield," he called, voice carrying through the frozen air. "What manner of company is this?" Her knees trembled, the strength in her voice too brittle to answer. Chenoa stood silent, his dark gaze steady on the Reverend, unflinching. The wind rattled the steeple as though echoing the tension. "She was half dead in the storm," a voice said gently from behind the crowd. Margaret Boone, the preacher's wife, emerged, her face lined not with scorn but with quiet sorrow. "We ought to thank the Lord someone found her." But Silas shook his head, lips pressed thin. "A wolf may carry a lamb in its jaws, yet we do not call it mercy." His eyes shifted to Eliza, sharp as a blade. "Did he take you against your will?" The question struck her like a slap. Eliza's mouth opened, then shut again. Words tangled in her throat. The truth, that he had saved her, that he had given her warmth when no one else remained, felt too fragile to place before these faces. Shame and fear chained her silence. The murmur of the crowd thickened, voices buzzing like flies. "She's ruined. Savage's woman. He'll bring war upon us." Each whisper curled through the air like smoke, filling her lungs until she could hardly breathe. Chenoa did not move, but she felt the strength in his stillness, the unspoken promise that he would not yield to their venom. She wished she could lean on that strength openly, but the weight of their eyes held her upright in shame. Margaret stepped closer, her voice quiet but firm. "Look at her. She is hurt, she is frightened. Can you not see kindness when it stands before you?" Her words flickered against the crowd, a brief warmth that did not last. Josiah McGraw, a rancher broad of chest and heavy with drink, pushed forward. His hand hovered near his revolver, his breath white in the air. "Kindness?" He spat. "He walks her in here like she's his prize. Next he'll be taking our stock, our women, our land." His eyes fixed on Eliza, narrowing. "Best tell us now, girl, before it's too late." Eliza's body shook, her lips forming words she could not force out. She wanted to cry that it was not like that, that this man beside her had been the only light in a night that had tried to claim her life. But fear of ridicule sealed her mouth. Chenoa's voice cut through the murmurs, low and resonant. "She is safe." The crowd fell quiet, startled by the strength of his tone. For a moment, silence spread wider than judgment. Yet the words that should have comforted only deepened suspicion. "Safe?" Josiah barked a laugh. "Safe with the likes of you? Don't speak of safety when you've got blood on your hands from raids we ain't forgotten." His hand drifted closer to the butt of his gun, the crowd shifting with him, like reeds bending to a single wind. Eliza's pulse hammered in her ears. She reached for Chenoa's arm, a small, trembling gesture, barely visible beneath the hide. His gaze flickered down to her hand, then back to the men. He did not rise to anger, did not flinch, though danger pressed close as the steel at Josiah's hip. Margaret Boone stepped between them, her shawl fluttering in the cold. "Enough," she said, voice stronger than expected. "This girl has bled in the snow. Will you bleed her again with your tongues?" Her eyes moved across the faces until they lowered, ashamed but stubborn. The Reverend lifted his chin, torn between his wife's plea and the pressure of the crowd. His voice, though softened, still bore the weight of judgment. "She must decide where she belongs." Eliza felt every gaze tighten around her, waiting, demanding. Her chest heaved, breath catching on the barbed wire of expectation. She wanted to speak, to declare that she belonged nowhere but beside the one who had carried her from death. But the crowd's weight pressed against her courage, crushing it. Her silence screamed louder than words. Josiah sneered, taking her silence as confession. "You see? She can't deny it." He stepped closer, boots crunching in the snow, the brim of his hat shadowing eyes dark with triumph. "She's with him now. She's his." The words struck like iron, branding her with shame she did not deserve. Eliza lowered her gaze, tears threatening but withheld, her heart tearing between the judgment of the town and the truth she could not voice. Chenoa placed himself slightly before her, his frame blocking Josiah's advance. The fire in his eyes did not flare into violence. It smoldered with quiet defiance, the strength of a mountain that no storm could move. The air grew taut, every breath drawn sharp. Snowflakes drifted lazily, indifferent to the tension of men. Somewhere a child cried, the sound small against the silence. Reverend Boone finally spoke, voice low. "This will not rest easy." The crowd began to scatter, some muttering, some casting lingering stares, their whispers trailing into the cold like smoke from dying fires. Margaret lingered last, her eyes soft on Eliza. "Do not let their words chain you, child," she said gently. Then she too was gone, her shawl vanishing into the doorway of her home. Only Josiah remained, his hand still hovering near his revolver. He spat in the snow, the dark stain steaming. His gaze locked on Chenoa, then on Eliza, and his voice dropped to a growl. "This ain't finished." He turned and strode off, leaving his threat coiled in the air like a snake ready to strike. Eliza clutched the hide tighter around her shoulders, her breath trembling, her shame a heavy cloak. The warmth of Chenoa's nearness steadied her, yet her silence gnawed deeper than her wound. For the first time she understood that survival in the wilderness had been easier than what waited in the eyes of men. And as the last echo of Josiah's boots faded, she realized with a chill that the true danger had only just begun. The days that followed dragged like a wagon through mud. Eliza felt the eyes of the town upon her wherever she walked, whispers darting around corners like shadows that never slept. She stayed mostly in the cabin Margaret Boone pressed upon her, though even within its walls she heard the judgment seeping through. Neighbors talking too loudly near the window, children repeating their parents' words with cruel innocence. "She's the savage's woman. No better than stolen stock." The gossip swirled until it began to feel like a second wound, deeper than the one on her ribs. Chenoa came and went in silence, carrying firewood, bringing fresh meat from the hills. His presence filled the small cabin with quiet strength, though he spoke little. She found herself watching him from the corner of her eye. The way his hands moved with certainty, the patience with which he carved wood for the fire, the stillness in his face that revealed nothing yet made her ache to understand. One evening she whispered, "They'll never accept it." He looked at her, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, before setting down the knife he had been sharpening. "Do you want their acceptance?" Her breath caught. No one had asked her that, not even herself. She clutched the hide around her shoulders, feeling the weight of shame pressing in. I want to belong somewhere." His silence answered more than words could. She lowered her eyes, ashamed of her longing. The truth lingered between them like smoke. By morning the whispers had sharpened into action. Josiah McGraw's voice rose above the tavern's murmur, feeding men on their fear. "You let that savage walk our streets with one of our women? You think the rest of his kind won't come sniffing around next? He's marked her as his, and by keeping her, he mocks every last one of us." The crowd agreed, drink fueling their courage. By the time night fell, boots crunched in the snow outside Margaret's cabin. Eliza was stirring broth when she heard it. The muffled voices, the deliberate scuff of footsteps. Her stomach sank, her hand tightening around the spoon. Chenoa was by the fire, head lifting like a wolf catching scent of danger. He rose, broad shoulders blocking the door even before the knock came. "Open up," Josiah's voice boomed, heavy with self-righteousness. "We've come for the girl." Eliza's breath quickened. "No," she whispered, rushing toward the door, but Chenoa held out a hand, stopping her with nothing more than his presence. His gaze on her was steady, calm even as the voices outside grew louder. "She belongs with her people," another man shouted. "Not holed up with the savage." The words cut deeper than knives. Eliza felt her shame rise, twisting her insides. She wanted to scream the truth, that they had abandoned her, that she had been saved by the man they condemned, but her voice faltered beneath the weight of their judgment. Chenoa opened the door slowly. Cold air swept in, carrying the scent of whiskey and gunpowder. Josiah stood at the front, a half-dozen men behind him, rifles slung and anger glowing in their eyes. "She stays," Chenoa said simply, his tone flat, final. Josiah sneered. "You think you get to decide? You've no claim here. She's ours to protect. She is not property." The words rang like struck iron. Silence stretched, then broke with mocking laughter. Eliza stepped forward, clutching the shawl at her chest. "Please," she tried, her voice trembling. "He saved my life." Her words hung in the air, fragile as snowflakes, only to be shattered by Josiah's bark. "Saved you, or took you? Can't you see, girl? He's bound you with shame, and you're too blind to speak it." The crowd murmured in agreement, faces hardening. Her throat closed. She turned toward Chenoa, seeing the storm gathering in the lines of his body, the calm before violence. "Don't," she whispered to him. "Please." For the first time she saw conflict in his eyes, not fear but sorrow, as if her plea bound him more tightly than their threats ever could. Slowly, he stepped back, placing his buffalo hide on the table. It was the same hide he had wrapped around her in the cave, the same that had kept her alive. Now it lay heavy between them, a gesture of surrender that cut through her like betrayal. The men surged forward, emboldened by his restraint. Josiah reached for her arm. She recoiled, but his grip closed like iron. "You'll come back where you belong," he growled. Something inside her snapped. She saw the hide on the table, remembered the cave, the firelight, the hand brushing her hair from her face. Belonging was not here, not in the mouths of men who named her ruined. Belonging had been in the silence of his care, in the strength of his stillness. "No," she said, her voice breaking but clear. She tore her arm free, stumbling back to Chenoa's side. The crowd froze, stunned. Josiah's face darkened, rage boiling. "You'd choose him over your own?" Her chest heaved, but she held her ground. "I'd choose truth." The air bristled with the threat of violence. Josiah's hand went to his revolver, men behind him raising their rifles. Chenoa stepped forward, shielding her with his body, his eyes unyielding. "Enough!" Margaret Boone's voice cut through the night like a bell. She had come, shawl wrapped tight, her breath clouding in the cold. She stood between the rifles and the pair, her figure small yet immovable. "Will you spill blood on your own snow? For shame, every one of you." Her words rippled through the crowd, but Josiah's hand remained on his weapon. His eyes flicked to Eliza, narrowing. "This isn't over," he spat. He stepped back, but his threat lingered, coiling in the night air like smoke from a fire not yet lit. The men withdrew slowly, muttering, casting looks sharp with promise. The door shut. Silence pressed heavy in the cabin. Eliza sank onto the bench, her hands trembling. The buffalo hide still lay on the table, and the sight of it filled her with ache. He had tried to let her go, to spare her from their wrath, yet she had chosen him in front of them all. Her chest rose and fell with ragged breaths. Chenoa moved closer, kneeling before her, his scarred hands resting on his thighs. His eyes met hers, dark as river stones, holding questions unspoken. For the first time she did not look away. "I can't survive their whispers," she said softly. "But I can't survive without you." The fire flickered, shadows stretching across the walls. Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft and relentless. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, its cry long and mournful. Eliza shivered, clutching the hide to her chest once more. She knew then that Josiah would not let this rest, that the storm inside the town would break upon them soon, fiercer than the one that had nearly killed her in the cave. The storm returned with a vengeance, a white curtain that swallowed the valley whole. Snow swirled around the cabins until roofs vanished beneath its weight, and every door was barred against the cold. But no door could keep out the whispers that still clung to Eliza's name. They hissed in the dark corners of the tavern, curled around pews in the church, rode the wind itself. She bore them like stones in her chest, but her steps no longer faltered. She had spoken once, she had chosen once, and though fear gnawed at her, the memory of Chenoa's shadow shielding her steadied her soul. It was at dawn, when the storm's cry softened, that the reckoning came. A pounding struck Margaret's cabin door, loud enough to rattle its frame. Eliza rose from the cot, heart thundering, while Chenoa stood already waiting, his body blocking the entrance before she could breathe a word. The door swung wide. Josiah McGraw stood in the threshold, his beard crusted with snow, his eyes bright with hate. Behind him, a cluster of men carried rifles, their breath smoking in the bitter air. "You've shamed this town long enough," Josiah snarled. "The girl comes with us now. You can walk away or bleed here, savage, it makes no difference." Eliza gripped the buffalo hide around her shoulders. Her voice trembled but did not break. "I will not go with you." Her defiance hung in the air, startling them all. Josiah's jaw tightened, fury burning deep. He raised his rifle. Then I'll take him down first, and see if you sing the same tune after. Chenoa stepped forward, unarmed but unyielding. His voice carried like stone breaking ice. You will not touch her. The air snapped. A shot cracked, echoing against the cabins, sending birds scattering into the pale sky. Eliza cried out as Chenoa staggered, a red bloom spreading across his shoulder. The world seemed to still, the snow falling slower, the wind muffled, as she watched him stumble yet remain standing, his body a wall between her and the rifles. No! Eliza's scream tore from her throat. She rushed to his side, pressing her hands against the wound, hot blood seeping through her fingers. His breath shuddered, but his eyes stayed locked on the men before them, steady even in pain. See how weak he is, Josiah barked, emboldened. She'll see sense now. He raised his rifle again, but before he could fire, Margaret Boone's voice rang out through the storm. Enough! She strode from the crowd, shawl whipping in the wind, her face fierce with outrage. She planted herself between Josiah and the wounded man, eyes blazing. Do you not see what stands before you? A man who bled to save a life you were too cowardly to protect. Shame on you, Josiah McGraw, and on every man who lifts his gun against mercy. The crowd shifted uneasily. Some lowered their rifles, ashamed beneath her words. But Josiah's rage only deepened. He's no man, he spat. He's a savage. And if you can't see it, then you're as blind as she is. He shoved past Margaret, raising his rifle once more. Eliza rose then, her body shaking but her voice strong. She stepped before Chenoa, arms spread wide, her shawl falling into the snow. If you shoot him, you'll have to shoot me too. The silence that followed was sharper than the gunfire. Every eye fixed on her, a frail figure standing against steel. Her heart pounded, yet her voice carried clear. You abandoned me to die. He carried me from death. You call him savage, but he is the only one who showed me grace. If that makes me ruined in your eyes, then I will wear the name proudly. Josiah's face twisted, rage clawing at the edges of disbelief. His finger tightened on the trigger. But then, from the crowd, another voice rose. She speaks true, a farmer muttered, lowering his rifle. Another followed, shame pulling at his face. One by one, the guns dipped toward the snow. Only Josiah remained, trembling with fury. You'll regret this, he hissed. But his power had slipped. His followers no longer stood behind him. He spat in the snow, a dark stain on white, then turned and stormed away, his boots crunching like thunder into silence. The men dispersed, leaving only Margaret, Eliza, and Chenoa in the snow. Eliza turned to him, her hands still pressed to his wound. His face was pale, sweat glistening against the cold, yet his eyes stayed on hers, unwavering. She felt her tears freeze as they fell. Don't leave me, she whispered. His lips curved, faint but sure. Don't be afraid. You are safe with me. Her chest broke open with the weight of it. She pressed harder against his wound, her tears falling onto his skin. No, she answered, her voice firm now. You are safe with me. Together, with Margaret's help, she half carried him back into the cabin. The fire roared once more, smoke curling into the rafters, warmth fighting back the chill. She worked with trembling hands, binding his wound as he had once bound hers. For every cloth pressed, every thread tied, she whispered his name as though it were a prayer too sacred to forget. Night fell. The storm raged outside, but within the cabin, a new stillness took hold. He lay resting, his breath heavy but steady. She sat beside him, fingers entwined with his, her head bowed in quiet devotion. She felt the truth rise inside her. Belonging was not a place or the approval of others. It was a hand that reached for yours in the dark and did not let go. When dawn came, the storm had passed. Snow stretched endless and pure across the valley, glittering beneath the pale sun. The town was hushed, its shame heavy in the air. But Eliza no longer bent beneath their whispers. She walked with her head lifted, her steps aligned with the man who had carried her from death. And as she pressed his hand against her heart, she turned her face to the sky and breathed deep, knowing she had crossed the breaking point and found not ruin but redemption. To you who listen now, remember this. The world will try to name you, to chain you with its judgment. But the truest names are spoken not by the crowd, but by the hands that hold you when you are broken. And if you find such hands, whether scarred or trembling, cling to them. For in them, you will find your home.